already get your speaking order. I think just one general reminder is to please utilize the microphone whenever you want to give POI, because otherwise it will not be caught by the recording. So all the microphone in front of you, please utilize it for POI. Secondly, understanding that there are microphones in front of you, do be mindful of the volume that you use when you are talking to your teammates and discussing with your teammates. All right. My name is Grace Sorgracia. I will be chairing this round alongside my panel of judges, Manda Bagaskara and also Marcia. I think we can commence with round 9, the last preliminary round of NUDC 2024. I call the Prime Minister to open this debate. Here.
Check, audible? Okay, thank you. My speech begins in 3, 2, 1. When a certain narrative about forgiveness being a virtue is pushed out in society, it would lead to be a massive catastrophe within the society. How so? First, it will create a very irrational standard that everyone basically have to forgive simply because this narration is out there being exists to begin with. Second, we feel like with the existence of this narrative being pushed out, people will actually determine for them to be able to forgive simply because if you don't forgive, you will be perceived as a bad person, simply because that's what the society and the narrative are applicable in the society. Due to this characterization, we feel like it's really gonna become harmful if forgiveness being a virtue is actually a thing in the society, right? Again, this house believe that those kind of words to begin with, narrative, this is actually obsolete, which is out of date. But see some setup first. First setup, let's see what forgiveness is it to begin with, right? In the Christianity or in Islamic teachings trajectory, it is an act of accepting that things has been perpetuated to you, these peoples have done harm to you, but you had to let it go, don't hold any grudge to begin with. You are not allowed to resent, you're not allowed to be mad at it, you have to forgive it, simply because it has happened, but you have to forgive them, because yeah, you should move on with your life. We feel like this characterization is really harmful, even if they might argue that forgiveness doesn't equal forgetful. We feel like at the end, it will still at the end of the day be unjustifiable, because the way for you to show that you don't forget the harm that they did is actually to put out specific harm, a specific burden for this perpetuator, for them to actually evaluate themselves, for them to actually re-evaluate that they have done the deed to you, that it's very harmful, that it affected you and make you vulnerable. Second characterization, we feel like in this current status quo, where criminal acts are rampaging widely perpetrated, forgiveness is simply not enough. If it is, then CGS will not exist, right? We feel like the parameter of violations that you experience wasn't the sole parameter for the state to decide sanctions to be cast, for example. The violation toward the value of the state, for example, also count. Simply, if you are victims of abuse, for example, and you feel like you're okay to forgive that, doesn't necessarily mean that all people who feel abused in the past feel the same way that you do. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have the parameter like you are, because some people might feel the intensity of the world very differently, so they perceive things differently. The existence of this narrative basically assume that people have the same parameter, that people manage to forgive. This is very, very harmful to begin with, right? That's why CGS exists in our current status quo to be a preventive ordeal for them to actually ensure that justice is served even if you forgive or not. This is why the terms of forgiveness forgiveness being a virtue is basically an obsolete thing and not applicable to the society. Third characterization. Let's see about obsolete first. When we mention obsolete, we mean that this is basically out of date, it is irrelevant, it's not as much applicable in the society, meaning it cannot cater through the developing society. It isn't enough because in society, many types of crimes committed, for example, in different ways, and in different situations, for examples. In the past, you might see that some sort of harm is perpetuated to you when they physically attack you. But now we have cyberbullying, for examples. We have cyber crimes, which basically tells you that this kind of like forgiveness is not enough simply because problems or dynamics of problems are simply changing and furthering. So yeah, forgiveness is not enough for you to cater to actually make these perpetrators realize what they've done, right? We want to clarify, when the narrative regarding forgiveness is if virtue is glorified, first, what will happen is that people will put expectations that you have to forgive because if you don't, simply, you're a bad person. Then this whole portrayal will make you question yourself, why aren't you forgiving? Am I a bad person to begin with? Deep down, you won't forgive, but because society ought you to actually forgive, you will appear as if you forgive. You will pretend that you will forgive. I.e., for example, you are victims of abuse, you're a victim of bullied. You will pretend that this bullied or if this abuser is forgiven. They can move on with their life simply when they know that you forgive them. But deep down, you don't move on with your life simply because you're still stuck in the moment. You have to forgive because you're pushed to, you're ought to, but inside, you're still very triggered. This will lead to two things. These oppressions will lead to many things. First, triggered. When you actually pretend that you forgive, but inside you don't, whenever you see them, for example, you will have some sort of like triggered, you will be traumatic, you will do some sort of catharsis or like triggered in the very first place because you see these people. You're not allowed to talk about your feeling. Even if you did, you are allowed to talk about your feelings. Society won't see how vulnerable you are simply because society perceives you that you already forgive, meaning you already move on with your life. This is harmful because then discussions about solutions cannot exist simply because you perceive yourself as okay. You're okay with the problem that you experience, and this is harmful because society feel like, oh, you're okay with it, then you don't need any kind of like help to begin with. Second, we feel like when this narrative exists in the society, it will create no evaluation for the bullies. It doesn't exist simply because this burden that they have, which is not being forgiven, has already been lifted up in their shoulder. Simply with these kind of things, they will do no evaluation. They will not have the incentive to do so. Simply because, yeah, even the victims of very bad abuse that you've done has forgive you. You don't have the moral compass and moral oppressions that this is bad. Third, we feel like what will happen is that again, people feel the intensity of the world different. When this kind of narrative being pushed out, it's like the society perceives that the parameter is indifference. At the end, even if like they will start to compare people who are raped, for example, trigger warning, people who are mocked by their friends as in the same level, simply because they both have to forgive, while the other problem might be severely much worse than the other. This is not actually. This is actually a very fallacy because it is very harmful for the society. Second, we feel like you need to show how vulnerable you are for the people, for them to be able to realize that what they've done to you is very severe, for them to evaluate themselves. If they say like, yeah, rehabilitation exists for these people, or examples, to evaluate themselves, we feel like there still will be no incentive for these people to actually go by themselves. Because here's the thing, right? When they did a crime, they did it by themselves, right? When they abuse you, they abuse you by their own will. We feel like if they get rehabilitations, it's all because of like the sanctions coming from the nations or like the state regulations, for example. It doesn't initiatively came from them. So the incentive for them to actually feel that they are responsible initiatively is by giving them this specific burden that they aren't forgiven, so that at the end of the day, they will be able to realize that what they did is very severe, managed to evaluate, rather integrated on Kak Naya's argument, right? We feel like at the end of the day, victims of rape, for example, when they forgive their rapists because they are ought to do so with the existence of this narrative, it isn't fair because at the end of the day, yeah, basically these people won't feel like as burdened as it is. Even if they want to say that justice or jurisdiction exists to actually be utilized by these people, we feel like it won't be as effective because at the end of the day, it was not initiative, it was not by their free will, which basically means if they go out of their rehabilitation, they have a chance to be recidivist again simply because it's bad. Proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I call upon the Leader of Opposition to open OO's case. Here.
Trigger warning. Some specific content regarding trauma childhood. So sorry, I'm so sorry, it's not my personal opinion, it's just for the sake of this debate. But I'll try to keep it low and not hurting for anyone. If in yourself you always depending your happiness, or you always depends your happiness to the perpetrator being punished, you never be happy. Maybe the perpetrator happy in jail, maybe the perpetrator happy with their new wife, for example. You trap under this vicious cycle that you cannot forgive yourself for being raped, for example, because the perpetrator is happy. This is you that is wrong. This is you that attracting them. This is exactly why we don't want people to hold a grudge, even because this perpetrator is not their fault. It's not under their control. We think we win this debate. The only source of grudge, competition, cynicism, and the reason why you want to attack other people is because we're not forgiving. Life is never under your control except forgiving, right? Forgiving that you live, forgiving that God make you born to in a bad environment, that make you living in a bad life, for example. Forgiving God that you are failing again and again, even though you are fighting for life, for succeed, for example. Even forgiving yourself for failing SBMPTN and burdening your parents, for example. Without forgiveness, human never free in this limitation, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, set up. Narrative mean that first, insofar we prove you that forgiveness is solving a problem and it's being virtue in and of itself, we win. Secondly, insofar without forgiveness being true narrative, insofar without forgiveness, people will not forgive, we will win this debate. And thirdly, society, we think we also discuss about society perspective. All rebuttal integrated in my speech. Firstly, why forgiveness is in and of itself is a virtue. Note, forgiving means that you forgive other people's mistake, you forgive yourself mistake, refrain in blaming yourself for not fulfilling the life expectation, even forgiving God and even forgiving your parents. Firstly, we think forgiving other people. People always have at least once hurted by other people, right? Either in childhood, adolescence, by their friends, or by their parents. We concede that it's harmful. It creates stress for you. Even trauma, for example. You're afraid of someone and having negative emotions toward yourself because of someone's fault, right? You can get the harm emotionally because of someone else. Problem is that human cannot choose the environment they live in or circumstances they live in, right? For example, yes, there is ideal parenting, but not all parents is having good parenting though, and you cannot expect that you born and asking God, for example, before you born, that you born in good parent though. Therefore, secondly, parents is living their first time too, ladies and gentlemen. You get and parents is living their first time too. You get the harm of having bad custody, but you cannot blame parents or anyone because it is circumstances, for example. Maybe your parents also live under certain circumstances that force them to tiger parent you, for example. Maybe they don't have knowledge to access or capacity in accessing good parenting education. But you still get the harm though. You get stress, but no one to blame. This is so stressful. You lost control over your life. This is the nature of human, ladies and gentlemen, which is uncertainty. Because of this trauma or living experience, you get to live a life that not perfect. But here though, your only power is to let go though. You have the power to let your fear go, to choose to be responsible and free in this life that is very limited for the very get-go. Maybe OJ say that we don't have agency, but I say no. Insofar you have ability to choose whether you want to hit your children because you're tiger parenting parents or not, it's your choice. We are not debating in a vacuum when people living their life because of trauma, for example. E.g., when you have trauma about learning because toxic school environment, your agency to be teacher that not like that in the future is more important though. You always making an active choice to be better because you know the feeling of hurtful when you get this trauma. But this happen only when you forgive. Forgive means accepting that everything that comes to you without your control that hurt you. Accepting that it's okay to fail again and again because someone, for example, but you just to get up and face this world again with smile. smile. Then why it is exclusive? Why the benefit of forgiving is exclusive when there is this narrative? Judge, narrative means there is a society discussion. Narrative means that society universally accept this forgiveness as a virtue, that something is true in and of itself. What happened? First, society always push to you to forgive. It doesn't mean society never give you time, because yeah, bad people exist, but under side is also exist. And secondly, good people more increasing under your side. Good people that push you to forgive, that be there for you, and maybe pat your back for you, like God, for example, will also exist under our side. And secondly, the use of psychologists, because you know the essence of psychologists is increasing. It because you know psychologists is make you accept, make you forgive, not make you running away from your problem, or make you running away, or make you blaming your perpetrators. Why then it's important? Firstly, we think that humans have an innate tendency to be negative, ladies and gentlemen. When you fail in a competition like NUDC, for example, you tend to cry one day in your room and blaming yourself for not be able to maybe breaking, ladies and gentlemen. You have this innate tendency to be negative because innately human is negative. Therefore, they need other people to come out and opt out coming from this situation. We think these other people understandings is just exclusively happen under ourselves when they know and concede that forgiveness is a true. Yes, bad people exist, but also good people exist, and bad people is just, yeah, you can educate them better under our side, and society can blame them to being bad, for example. Secondly, human self-fulfilling prophecy that they are not wrong. This is used to answer O.J. Burden that perpetrator never ask forgiveness. This narrative will also force perpetrator to ask forgiveness, because there is society conceding that yeah, you need to forgive, therefore as perpetrator you need to ask for forgiveness, because in and of forgiveness is a virtue. Without this narrative, people less and less forgiving. There is no people that is traumatic and whatsoever trapped under cloud that is very harming for their own mental, for example. Society never care with each other emotion because they feel that each other emotion is not their business, for example. Meaning society will be more ignorant. Society will be more individualistic. In their side, if I fail in this NUDC tournament, my teammate will blame me, not make me happy, or not just like confirming me, because you know under their side of the house, forgiveness is not a virtue. You don't always expect to be forgiving other people. Proud, never been proud to be an opening opposition.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Calling DPM to close OG's case. Here.
Because this is a live room, I just want to get the message out there that it's going to be pretty much triggering for everyone who watched this. The moment OO said, "It depends your happiness based on the perpetrators being held, you'll never be happy." This is about happiness. This is about holding people accountable and healing process of the victims, right? The concept itself is pretty much problematic because of two reasons. One, the parameter of trauma will be linear, but two, victims going to self-blame themselves. Why? Because I am a bad person, because I am not able to forgive someone then. Even in religion, all people go to hell for the sins they've done, for example, they said. This shows you that forgiveness is a virtue is pretty much not enough, right? But then they said about forgiveness is pretty much society will give you time to actually be forgiving. But we feel like then, if you have still the pressure to actually forgive someone, for example, you still suffer through those times because you had to do both, right? You have to heal and you also have to accept the bad behavior coming from them, but also have to forgive, right? You need to sacrifice one because we feel like this is not pretty much a beneficial trade-off to begin with. But first, for the extension then, One clarification, we never reject forgiveness is something that is very much good. We reject the narration that is in order for you to be good, in order for you to be perceived as someone that is very much noble, you have to forgive every single mistake everyone that have ever encountered to you, regardless that you pretty much going to accept it or not, right? But two, if we regress society standard in order for you to be good, to be a good functioning member of society, you have to accept apologies coming from people, for example. So you don't perceive as someone that is inherently evil because you don't accept apologies coming from someone that is pretty much inherently evil, right? Three, this is why perceiving forgiveness as something that is very much a virtue is going to give you very much bad impact to begin with. A, this is going to be a matrix for society to perceive whether you are bad or good, but B, metrics for also yourself, right? Why you can't accept apologies from people. You will seen as someone that is pretty much bad if, from yourself as well, right? You question yourself, why aren't you forgiving like anybody else, for example? How then this narrative come into play in the communal impact? One, I think society is not going to be progressive anyway, as if like today right now, right? How is it likely? A, see how in conservative society, you have always inherent forgiving mistakes will lead you to a better person, for example. That's why my mother will forgive my father's abusive act, for example, and accept her fate, for example, that she went into, for example. But B, but the contrary in our side, the counterfactual is that forgiveness is not something that's firm. It's not something that's pretty much going to be a virtue because it's pretty much outdated, right? It's never going to be something that's you going to see as noble because you know what is noble? You fight for your old tradition and that oppress you to begin with. How you fight for your own agency and your rights that are not accepting every people bad behavior that going to be perceived or internalized as ideology, for example. That's why you never forgive as a woman that is a victim of patriarchal society. You never forgive as a victim of exploitation coming from the environment. You never be forgiven as people that living in poverty because of the toxic social structure that government incapability that already manifests, right? But the counterfactual is you're going to advocate for what you perceive as your rights, your agency, and also your autonomy. Meaning, then we're not going to see how forgiveness is actually going to make us a better person. Exactly, you're pretty much going to be oppressed by the narration that every people in the society, in order for them to be noble, they have to forgive everyone. That's why we believe forgiveness, to be perceived as such noble, is going to be outdated anyway. Exactly, this is hinder the society's progression. But second, the output for this narrative then, one, regarding oppression from actually forgiving, when deep down you never accept their act to begin with. You're going to bottle up all of your feeling and never actually explain as to why then you never forgive them. And this is the output. Three outputs. A, you keep all those negative feelings because you pretty much brainwash yourself and internalize yourself into thinking that you accept them when you never accept their apologies to begin with. But B, exactly then, whenever you face into triggering events or people, you face and lead into like the act of cathartic or try to even bump out all of your emotion. But see, human emotion is very, very dynamic, right? You can make those bottle up emotion to be a ticking bomb, for example, for you to explode, and also going to make the bomb, those explode. Society didn't question you. Why you become so dramatic anyway? But yes, OG.
But why, when you never forgive, you be happy and still not think about the mistake of your perpetrator?
I don't understand that because I feel like when you don't forgive people, then you're going to also tell them, explain to them why then you're not going to be as forgiveful as the society going to perceive you. Exactly, you never accept their bad behavior, for example, because you still are traumatized, right? Meaning there's going to be discourse of like evaluation coming from you and also the perpetrator, for example. When there's like a discourse of like evaluation, then the perpetrator know that this is something that is pretty much perceived as a bad behavior. They know that they do something that is bad behavior. On your side, because exactly you're going to forgive everything, then the perpetrator never actually know that they're doing something bad. Therefore, in the future, if they're bullying in their high school, they're going to be a bully even when they grow up as an adult, for example. Exactly, they never see the lack of deterrence as to how then, oh, people not forgiving me. Because exactly every act that you did, you're going to be forgiven anyway. So therefore, the lack of deterrence is going to be coming on your opening opposition. But second, let's be real, not every human has the unwavering resilience and ideal, some sort of like a personality like opposition pictures, right? We never say forgiveness is not okay. Forgiving is okay as long as that person deserves to be forgiven, meaning they know they already face the deterrence, they know they have and face the evaluation, for example. But once the narrative exists, this is going to create exactly the parameter you have to be forgiveful in order for you to be perceived as good, right? But second argument, this narrative exactly going to pretty much be a good weaponization coming from the communal impact, for example, or even person. You see, United States, for example, used to apologize for the people of color, indigenous people, for example. They apologize for pretty much colonizing their land and use people of color as slavery, for example. This is likely to happen exactly because society perceives forgiveness as something that's very noble, very much a virtue. Then how then the society, people of color and also indigenous people, are relentlessly have to accept the apologies coming from the US, even without the evaluation of US trying to flourish or even thrive the community to begin with. Exactly, even those apologize that coming from the US is pretty much never has the discourse of like evaluation, try to actually thrive all of this community. Like this is pretty much very likely, right? Because the apologies coming from the US never going to fix the generational trauma that people of color, even indigenous people, have to face to begin with. Lastly, because this is a live room, even if we not proceed, I'm very proud to be the acara representative in this round. Thank you.
Thank you, DPM, for that speech, calling the LO to close the opening layer debate. Here.
Starting in. Oh yeah, trigger warning. This is just for the purpose of the debate. I don't want us to hold grudge after this NUDC, because the moment you hold grudge and you never forgive yourself for whatever progress that you made in this tournament, it's not going to change anything. We think that it's better for you to move on and improve yourself so that at the end of the day you can have a better future, right? I think it is so cruel for opening government to say that, you know, to always put people in an unlimited suffering, to always acting on vengeance, to always demand for, you know, other people to be harmed the same way, the way that you get, right? I think victim will most likely regret their life, deem themselves to be unworthy anymore the moment like they still cannot like forgive their perpetrators. And I think that this is bad, because I think that oppression, the moment it is done, it is irreversible, right? You cannot undo what they've done, no matter how long you hold grudge. People never get solace, because even though that you act vengeance on your perpetrator, you still have trauma. There is no discussion on how on the side of the house this kind of like trauma will be solved. I think the moment that, you know, we use this kind of like forgiveness as a virtue, society will have an incentive. How then this kind of like virtue is going to be taken so seriously? That's why psychiatrists exist, to improve and to help you. That's why the, you know, claim from OG that talk to you that people will force you to always receive forgiveness. I think it doesn't matter, because I think that psychiatrist does exist, meaning that the moment that you explode, I think that's okay. There is the process of you know, receiving forgiveness and also apologize, because we're not only talking about forgiveness per se, but we're also talking the process behind it. But I want to frame the debate, because I think OG is very messy. One, what does being a virtue mean? I think that when something's a virtue, people will always have an incentive to always ask for forgiveness, otherwise they're going to be scrutinized simply for not following what's deemed to be good by society. Therefore, forgiveness in government bench still exists, but people are unbothered to ask for forgiveness. So the moment humans have problems with each other, it's likely for them to not forgiving each other and stay in problem, because human also has ego that you need to take an account for. Being a virtue is important because it is a control to tone down this human's toxic ego. This is a tone for you to be able to then think about the future, what you need to do the moment you are being oppressed. For example, you need to also, you know, like, you know, demand for forgiveness under our side of the house. This flipping their benefit about how this kind of like movement is going to exist under the side of the house. Because I think that movement like social justice movement, feminist movement exists because they demand forgiveness from men. Because, you know, so you know, like social justice movement exists because they demand forgiveness from perpetrators to begin with. But secondly, if this is a virtue, therefore people deem this to be a very good, right? They don't want this to be tempered. That's why people also always want your forgiveness to be genuine. This tells you that people are not gonna take this for granted like what Uji tells you, right? We're not debating in a vacuum because we think that there's law, etc. That's why people are not gonna feel forced to forgive. If you're a victim of a crime, law will still punish your perpetrator before you're willing to forgive on our side of the house. Tells you that one, CJS exists on both sides. But secondly, forgiveness also includes retribution for you to always pay for your mistakes. Exactly because if this is a virtue, forgiveness is expensive, right? People are yes, not easily to forgive each other. It is expensive. Therefore, people are not just giving forgiveness and ask just because they have to do this effort to get kind of like forgiveness. Therefore, I'm also going to talk about solace and why this is actually matter in the debate. Because we think that solace can only be achieved the moment forgiveness is still a virtue when everyone is eager to ask and give one. Why is that so? Exactly because war, problems, criminality are massive in status quo. We think that forgiveness being a virtue is important for human to at least cope from difficulties. This is the only thing that they have. For example, the human law doesn't actually protect them. This looks like one, when you're being a victim, even though at best you actually receive retribution, you still don't forgive your perpetrator. You still wanting to do vengeance to wish them the bad thing. I think this kind of like picturization is bad because hatred is also not a good feeling and also not a good virtue because you cannot move on. You're trapping yourself in a constant trauma and a constant dilemma that you're always being oppressed. This is actually run winning. Because insofar as OG or like government bench never explain how victim will now on their side of the house will able to move on, this harm is pretty much valid because hatred also exists in a human. They don't always talk about trauma, right? But secondly, I think this limits your ability to be productive simply because you still hate other people and prepare for vengeance. Therefore, no improvement on yourself is going to happen. Day and night, you're still there because maybe you have to do teamwork with the people that you hate, and this kind of like, picturization matters because in the end of the day, not all people that you hate is the one that is bad because in the end of the day you're also going to do self-evaluation on our side of the house, right? But why then forgiveness being a virtue will move you on? Two structural reasons. One, exactly because you're not only forgiving other people, but like what Nisa said, you're also forgiving yourself. You know that momentum happen. Therefore, it's okay if you fail, for example. You can always find other moments and other opportunities. This is something that they never talk about, right? I think this kind of like opportunities, I think like OG's explanation only stop the moment victim being oppressed, but never tell you otherwise how they can actually liberate themselves, right? Secondly, because this debate is not only talking about forgiveness per se, but also about the process in it. This tells you to think that one, people can improve because the a priori of being forgiven is that you have to introspect yourself. You have to know what your mistake is because this is what a virtue. The moment that you don't follow that this kind of like prerequisite, you're not going to be forgiven because this is not following what the virtue means, right? You need to know your mistake first. But secondly, this flips OG harm because recidivism happens on their side because society never accepts past criminals because they never forgive them. Because after release from prison, these kind of like past criminals might recidivize again because they think that it's their fate to be a criminal because no matter, how much they change, people will never forgive them because this is not a virtue anymore. People can have like the incentive to not forgive them, but before 6, yeah.
For you to heal, you need to blame the situations for others. It is either yourself or the perpetrators. We think that it's a justifiable trade-off because they did the harm and you don't.
I think in the end of the day, if you like don't forgive them on your side of the house because you simply just because you don't want to, you don't know what you have on your mind, right? You just do this out of like, like simple decision making just because you hate them, but you never actually understand why this kind of like criminals are doing criminals in the very first place. Therefore, there is no improvement. But on our side of the house, not only that we're forgiving, but we're also thinking that these criminals might do crime because of a structural reason. Therefore, government will have the incentive to maybe like fix, poverty and so on. Then what are the impacts in opening opposition? That I think development, the reason why Japan can wake up after being bombed by US is because they move on. But on our side, I don't think that, like forgiveness is just like moving on, but on our side of us, we still demand for forgiveness because this is pretty much a virtue, right? People are still demonstrating to fight for injustices because they demand forgiveness at the end of the day. People are still rallying for human rights. In May, for example, happened because government of Indonesia never apologized for a victim of 1998. This is pretty much valid because this is why movement can hold on in very long because they demand forgiveness because this is pretty much virtue for them that they need. How then you weigh opening opposition? One, we heal better. Not only that, under the side of the house, they still pretty much doing with trauma, but this kind of trauma is still not going to be healed. On our side of the house, at least we forgive ourselves. But secondly, this is also improving because you have the ability to bounce back at the end of the day. You have the ability to think the moment you face problem, you think about this kind of like, solution that you might to think after you were forgiving other people oppose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of UP. I call upon Member of GOV to open CG's case. Here.
trigger warning before I state my argumentation. This does not represent my opinion at all. Just refer to me as member of government. I didn't get the point that OG bring to say. Who is the one at fault that doesn't clear in OG case? Because they just judge society, it is bad, society make a characterization that this normalization is bad, but they not really analysis that deeper that how can this narrative be made in the very first place. We cannot judge someone because that's the world teach them, right, from their childhood, from the very first they bring to the world. We cannot just say society is bad because that's what they already bring to them in the very first place. So what will be explained in the closing government side? First, forgiveness being adhered to, what we want to forgive is cannot be always count as something sincere, something good. Sometimes because it's just copying out the mechanism because it's easier the case, right? Second, a picture how the concept perceived by the society. Let's characterize how this can be. There is a childhood memory and the rooted narrative from the very young. This narrative keep pursued to them because society is root from the very long time. Older generation keep telling us that forgiveness means you are a smart child, you are very wise, you are a good kid. So that's why it keep become a merit for generational for long. So it will. That's why there is a standardization of this norm, and I will explain more in my argumentation. There is, for example, PKN lesson to teach you forgiveness is good, and any others, they have no other alternative to think other than this world. So we cannot just judge the society, you are bad, you are the one who make this law criminal, make some unclear and many other else. You cannot just judge the society because this already rooted from the very long time. We will analyze to you on the pre-merger implementation how this will create a significant harm to the opposition bench. And my third setup, we want to chill what the counter factual, what the counter narrative we want to give them. First, we want the children to have that rationality from the very first place, and we want to erase this narrative irrationality on the society by creating normalization. If you don't want to forgive someone, it's okay. You have all the right to judge when someone make harm, make fault to you, and then shamelessly or even hurtly asking for your forgiveness. You can accept it or you just reject that if you doesn't want to forgive this person. No. First, I will explain to you how this narrative will create more deeply. Process of forgiveness itself have become rooted in the implementation of society. There is older children being pressured to forgive. There is younger child, right? If you're a young older brother and you don't forgive your younger sibling because they, for example, stealing your food or many others, you are the bad one. You are the one who get your parents injured, right? You are the one who will be the bad kid from your parents instead. On school, when your classmate bullying you, but suddenly on a long time, they came to you to apologize because they want to be celebrity, for example. Looking how sincere you are, your head keep telling you to forgive them because you want to be good, but your harm is still there. They become celebrity, and here you are, keeping your harm by yourself. Sometimes what we want on our side, they can just badmouth them, yelling at them because they are the one who make fault to their life, right? And secondly, what we want, they can. Opposition bench cannot say that this children is rational enough because their process to be more easily to forgive is pressured by the personal pressure than that you must forgive everything or every other thing. And why all of this pushover is bad? First, this create the normalization of forgiveness already brought by OG, but they never explain to you how it will come. But this normalization is very toxic. What premise will rooting on the society? First, it creates narrative. Not all harm is irreversible, right? Every harm, every fault can be forgiven. This is very bad because if, for example, people rape you, then they ask for you in a kekeluargaan way to solve this. Then even if in their best case, in the opposition best case, you sincere forgive them, one day you will crossing them on the street and your bad memory come back to you. Your mom will push you back that, oh, I must forget it. They already apologized and I accept it anyway. But your heart, your mind, your body still memorize it and make you uncomfortable, right? What we want for this kind of actor is that they can mad at them, they can badmouth them, their perpetrator especially. They can yelling and just talk bad about them. So I will take the.
Yeah, I think forgiving is indeed hard, right? It takes crying day and night. That's why the moment you forgive, it is a virtue to applaud for.
Forgiveness is still there if they really want to make it. But what we want them to be is not creating that they must to be a good person to that forgive someone when they make a fault to you. That's our target in this debate, because how let's characterize our counterfactual and our narrative, what we want to be in this status quo or in this world. First, this narrative gone forever, narrative that forgiveness is fear to and many others. And second, they can choose to forgive or not to forgive their perpetrator. So what will the impact, the more impact that is just exclusive in the CG case? First, in education, how will our side will be pushing a good education? First, we provide children a healthy mind for them to grow, and that's kind. There is no kind of they must to be forgive someone if they want to be good or many others. It will gone forever, and we free them. And second, we free them from this kind of mindset and make them more grow as a stronger person more than the status quo. And second, what our impact in this, what we contribute to this debate, a better society. No one will look bad when something happening on you or another person that, especially for the other person that make your life is suffering. And so no better society, no society that will judge you that you're a bad person, you're not a good kid and many others. And second, more clear justice system will be better on our side. Why? Why is it exactly? So because on our side there is no kekeluargaan way or something like that, because people can make pursue a better a court or better system, because there is no forgiveness or many other else, because they need to be judged as a system, not like there is no other alternative. They must to be judged, and that's why we must win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Go, for that speech. Calling Member of Up to open CO's case. Here.
Can I have a few seconds to tidy up my case?
Okay, you may proceed, yeah.
Hello? Okay. You can refer me as him, his. We are debating under the motion it is still relevant or not, this kind of narrative, forgiveness being referred to. But before that, we're going to respond throughout the government. The government cases is likely to portray the society as judgmental, as evil, and etc. We do understand it is worst case scenario, and it did not like that in the status quo. Society, if this kind of narrative exists in the very first places, the society itself did not that judgmental if you have experienced that kind of problems, no. And even if it's true, it is showing and justify the urgency, how this narrative is still relevant and more urgent in this kind of status quo in this war. And it is showing how the government cases did not actually acknowledge how the nuances or the realistic war actually happening in the very first places. But before that, let's talking about the obsolete itself, about irrelevant. Something can be irrelevant because first, it may be there's no urgency or to need it anymore because they see that it is irrelevant anymore. Or it can be just irrelevant because exists or not, there is no differences. Or even if it exists, it can bring much more harm. But we can explain why in the very first places it is still justifiable, relevant, and more urgent in the first very places. But understand how they did not understand how actually the realistic world that human living. Understand that every day we experience problems and etc. Showing how this very needed in the very first place to handle how your daily life in study, work, and etc. Because in the very first place, human needed other humans, and its relations between humans is unavoidable. And this showing how justification of forgiveness is still happening in the very first places. And this is how we're going to be show that closing opposition cases is the prerequisite for opening opposition case to be worked. First, talking about how the process of forgiveness can be happen. It can be directly between the perpetrator and victim to be met each other, or indirectly, but how the self-evaluation by the victim itself to forgive the people itself. But how it's actually forgive means, it forgives that you solving the anger, sadness, you accepting that kind of things, and this is also going to be affect your daily life and also your decision making in the very first places that going to be affect your daily life also. And also, talking about the nuances in the very first place, yes, we accept not everyone can forgive, but also there's people that can forgive. And we're going to explain how it's still okay under this outside of the house. Because understand, at the very end of the day, forgiveness is really important to the people so that there is improvement philosophically and practically. Because most of the cases talking in the worst case scenario about trauma and etc. But understand, the majority of people not only against that, but also they, for example, you come late to office, others people angry to you and etc. How then you can applicate that kind of forgiveness things in your daily life also. But we're going to stay how it's still relevant in the current status quo. Because first, there is urgency to forgiveness in the society. The second, because its existence is important. We can explain it philosophically and practically. But first, talking about the urgency of forgiveness. This narrative is itself important for first individual and also the society. Because of what? First, forgiveness is the most accessible coping system that exists in the current status quo. Every people can do it, even though there's people also that hard to forgive. We did not deny that. But it is showing how the people can cope itself immediately in the time or even after that in the long term. Because you must understand, the process of forgiveness can be long term. It is showing how the people itself evaluate it. It does not immediately happen in the very first places. We are accepting that. And also for the society itself, it is important for the people in the society because people interacting each other. They are communicating each other. Just like, for example, just how can this going to be affecting the society? And they said that the government side of things being saying, oh, this is judgmental and etc. But we must understand that kind of things, the judgmental society can be solved if there is forgiveness. Because of what? The society itself as a whole, when these things happens, they can forgive each other. Oh, I'm being judgmental to other people. They evaluating and etc. Then they can be less judgmental. And also, we can create more tolerant people, can avoid stigmatization or also discrimination. Because of why? Example, you having problems with one people that represent one groups. If there's no forgiveness, you can apply that kind of stigmatization or there's also discrimination to a whole group. This is showing how in the context of Indonesia, it is really important in context of plurality. And this is how the urgency of the forgiveness for being a photo is still relevant, especially in context of plural things. And also how about its actions that is important because it can first affect philosophically and politically. First talking about the philosophically, because understand that in order to create a betterment of individual forgiveness is really important because of that. Because it has relation to self-control, self-esteem, acceptance, and etc. And also patience. This is affecting this whole of way of thinking. It is not separated. It is affecting the whole how individuals act and also how they perceive the world also. And also talking also how about the examples about the daily life like child to parents relation, boss and workers. How about how simple problems can be a chaotic and much more danger if there is no forgiveness. In the first place, it can be forgiven because it is simpler problems. At least by this narrative, even if the people hard to forgive, at least they can have accessibility to lessen their burdens every day. Because I understand the problems that they can gain, not only big problems, but also small problems that can be a bomb time if it's accumulated every time. And also talking about the practically also, because it is applicable, can be happen in our side everyday lives. Because understand, if you cannot forgive, it is okay. Because in the very first places, we understand that all people can be forgive, but it is not the society, isn't that judgmental so that, oh, you cannot fulfill this kind of matrix or ideality. No, the people, the society less likely to be judgmental and they can learn and accept and they can evaluate also. This is the worst case scenario that bring by the government side of the team. And also understand, it is normal for humans to against the problems every day. And the consequences, whether or not you forgive or not, it still exists, but at least we can mitigate it. We can minimize the consequences that affect our psychology and also affecting our daily life. We, compared to government side, did not have that kind of alternatives also. And let's imagine if there's no narrative in this very first place. The people will see that this forgiveness is not worthy or unworthy anymore to do. It is showing that how the people is first, less accessibility to less evaluate themselves because they will see, oh, there is no need for me to evaluate because at the very end of the day, I will not be forgiven in the very first place. It is showing how it is unimportant anymore to do the things at the very end of the day. And it's showing, they're assuming that they're very chaotic and etc. But understand, judges, the law still exists. Even if the victim is self-forgiving, the law still can be happen in the very side of the, our cases. This is the problem that the government side have. They are very framing this kind of war. It's very worst case scenario. And also we can see the nuances that exist in the very first place. We understand there is also people that hard to forgive. But understand this kind of narrative can also happen to people that are easy to forgive. They can understand the people. Oh, they are hard to forgive because of this experience and etc. They understand because this kind of way of thinking affecting the whole systems of how the people think. It can also become the coping and narrative for also the people that hard to forgive in the very first places, so that they can have betterment environments, so that the victims that have trauma and etc. can also get up compared to the government side of them. And also it can affect decision makings and their life, because how you forgive people also affect how you interact with other people, interact with your workers and etc., bosses and etc., your schools, your teachers. It's going to be being betterment, how you're going to be study, work, etc. It can affect the whole life in your places. And because of that, we're proud to still forgive everyone in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Opposition. Calling a government whip to close Gov bench case. Here.
Check. In a vast expanse of humanity, we've been told that it's okay to make mistakes, right? how this has perpetuated in society. 3 structural reasons. First, the narrative that applied to children on how children characterizations that they are easy to be brainwashed because simply children have less experience in the world. They are the vulnerable actor in this case that we don't want under their side of the house. This kind of children will be perpetuated that they have to accept that they are bad, that they have to accept that, it's okay for me to forgive my parents for example, tiger parenting me to begin with, right? But second, this is even applied that in the way that we are growing up in days to days, right? How there is a normalization in school, like PKN teach you about how you should be like benevolent person, as angelic as you should be. At the end of the day, you are creating an expectation that you have to for example, have this forgiveness that is going to be happen in status quo, right? The process is going to be much more harmful, right? Later, but thirdly, then, on how OO even justifying the tiger parenting at some extent because you have predetermined by universe argument, right? This is a very mismatched logic and somehow it is a paradox on their side, right? How you are going to create a normalization that tiger parenting is okay, you should forgive your parents. This become a cycle that also can be implemented by you in the future because you know that your child will also forgive you at the end of the day, right? This create a justification to more tiger parenting on their side of the house, right? What is also parallel into on how there is a minority cases that you are also, for example, at their best case scenario that that OO claim on how you are demanding forgiveness. At the end of the day, you are also going to create a paradox to begin with, right? But what CG brings you in this debate, right? We told you on how forgiveness is a choice and it's not a determination of societal perspective. People can forgive, but not consider whether my forgiveness is literally can leverage up our own social merit to begin with, right? But first of all, let's assess on OG before on opposition bench, right? What OG told you, number one, on how there is a standardization of rationality and forgiveness. We think that this sounds compelling, but they are not telling you how it can be standardized, how it can be so rooted. We told you that there are 4 structural reasons on how your own houses, you have to forgive your brothers. If not, you are going to be punished. But second, in school, you are also have to, if you do something bad, then you also have to forgive at the end of the day, right? If not, then you are going to be punished anyway by your teacher, and if not, you get a bad score and whatsoever. There is a certain punishment at the end of the day, right? But thirdly, even in the workplace, on how you have to, for example, forgive to your bosses if you don't, if you, for example, do this kind of bad actions and whatsoever, right? At the end of the day, even if this kind of bad action is something that you really want and whatsoever, this means that under their side of the house, they're still going to, for example, perpetuate this kind of social norm that is created like social construct anyway, right? There is an exploitation of saying sorry on their side of the house, right? Their analysis telling that pressure from external to go to CG because this is the prerequisite of it, right? But now let's jump to opposition's bench in general, right? So first of all, let's assess on OO first, right? What they posit is that number one, they say that it's the only power to let go because the other mechanism does not matter. We think that firstly, we need to analyze the process of letting go. There are 3 structural analyses as to why. Number one, the narrative will going to be implemented in society, thus a lot of people will going to forgive, so this framing is, this going to frame the harm is going to be so much massive on their side, right? But second, we think that letting go is very hard. You have to committing and accept that that bad action is totally okay. Normalization is never good if it compromises your own trauma, for example. It always recalling to your own trauma. To have thirdly then, we think that having a trauma is a very bad things to very bad things that we don't even want it to be happen in our life, right? You under their side of the house, you make it worse. Why? Because you recall to the moment on how you are going to create 2 things. Number one, you are going to second guess of your moment, the moment you are going to forgive this kind of person of perpetrator, for example, right? But second, you are also going to normalize these actions to begin with. At the end of the day, the opening government's harm is going to attack their case at the end of the day, right? Therefore, we think that it's much more likely that it's going to be much worse on their side. But second thing, that they say that self-blame is going to be much bad, because it's your self-blaming is bad because you know, under their side you have to forgive yourself and moving on, right? We think that yes, it is bad. Blaming yourself because you are forced to forgive, it's even bad, right? It is even worse on how you are also going to, you know, perpetuate this kind of thinking, for example, on how you are literally don't know why should I do this, because at the end of the day, I am forced by society to do this because this is a virtue to begin with, right? But second of all, we think that evaluation will not likely to be happen on their side, because basically when the moment under their side of the house, people are going to self-blame, meaning that under their side of the house, people will not seek for another alternatives, for example, to make them content and whatsoever. They're not going to, for example, you know, just simplistically saying sorry, then it become their coping out mechanism. But it is also on CO, right? On how they told you about it's irrelevant, on how they told you that this is the most accessible coping system, right? It is the most accessible, yet the most deadly one, right? The process of accepting and compromising on their side that they never talk about is inherently in a very hard way on how you have, you should, like, for example, this, you know, have these compromises of yourself, of your own ideology, for example, of your own feeling that you are going to, for example, feeling at the end, in 2 years in the future, you are going to recall on that moment, the moment you are going to forgive at the end of the day, right? Then compare it to, let's all of that, right? Let's compare it on CG then. What CG brings to you? Number one, on how people is not going to, people not being forgiven is totally okay, because it will breed the very big revenge that is going to be not likely on our side of the house, right? But second of all, we think that society can even like educate people better, because at the end of the day, we can also accept at the end accept the feeling at the end of the day, right? Therefore, we're so proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip. Calling upon Opposition Whip to close the entire debate. Here.
Panels, we think that all of the harm that opening government and closing government claim and assume can exist under our side of the house, we think that it's not going to exist under our side of the house. Instead, all of that will be more worse under government side of the house. But before that, let's engage to OO. We think that comparison between CO and also OO. We think that CO case is prerequisite for OO case to work, because we as the CO, we start from the daily life first that can later be specified to the trauma, etc. Meaning that OO come to this debate and directly talking about the trauma, etc., which is the worst harm, worst scenario, right? We think that they are too jumpy. Meanwhile, CO, we can explain to you step by step, significant for the general worst that can exist. We can, our case is prerequisite for all case to work at the end of the day. Now, let's engage to OG. OG come to this debate and they say that the harm that will exist under our side is the first, oppression to the victims, because they have to give the forgiveness, because if they do not or do not give the forgiveness, etc., society will claim them as the bad people. And secondly, they also say that, oh, there's not going to be evaluation because you or the victims will give the forgiveness to the perpetrator. At the end of the day, with the forgiveness, perpetrator not going to be punished. Here's the response. First, for the oppression. We think that oppression is not going to exist under our side of the house. Even the concept of the forgiveness is the virtue exists, it doesn't mean that the society force someone to forgive the perpetrator, etc., right? The force not going to exist coming from the society to the victims, for example, right? Because at the very first place, we think that virtue is the group of value, right? And this value support each other, which can affect someone's attitude, for example. What kind of value? First, the self-esteem, which can lead you to control yourself and when you can control yourself, you can forgive other people. I will explain later. And all of this value is connect each other. This is the picturization of the virtue at the end of the day, right? Before the victims or other people forgive, we think that forgiveness is just not come like that, right? It's not like that. We think that there are like several steps. At the end of the day, these people or the victims can forgive other people, right? Because first, they will accept or they will think what happened on their life, for example, right? So if they can accept it, meaning that they can control themselves, and like because they can accept it, they can evaluate what happened to themselves, meaning that's not going to make them depressed, right? Because we think that depressed exists because these people, the victims, they cannot accept all of those harms, for example, right? But under outside the house, there are several steps. First, like I've said before, right? So they will do the evaluation towards themselves for the very first place, and then after that, they can control themselves, they can accept all of those things to give them energy and brave to come out to the society. And first, they can forgive other people, for example, right? They can do the evaluation with themselves to make the self-esteem, for example, so they can forgive others. So evaluation still exists under outside the house. But secondly, they think that, evaluation is not going to exist, the perpetrator is not going to be punishment at the end of the day. Here's the response. The punishment of the perpetrator can also be exist, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean that we delete all kind of the law in the country, right? Law still exists to punish these people who do the bad or harm to the other people, right? Because at the very first place, these victims, they can have the self-esteem, they can control themselves, they can do the evaluation, they can come out to the society and voice that, what I get from these people, they can like report it to the court, for example, right? They can tell it, so this perpetrator, no matter what, they can also be punished by the perpetrator, by the court, for example, right? And we think that because they do like have the evaluation, they will think that, it's important for me to report this, because if I do not report this, meaning that these people will also go to the will do the bad things to the other people, right? So the other people will get the same harm. We think that's not good. So I think that the evaluation can also exist under our side of the house, right? But now let's engage to CG. CG talking, in comparison to our side of the house. Now let's engage to CG then. CG said that, they wanted to create a good, healthy mindset, for instance, or they will have good education. They wanted to tell to their children to like, it's okay for you to not forgive other people, etc., right? But we think that first, healthy minds not going to exist under their side of the house, because since these people are kids, for example, their parents give the mindset that, it's okay for you to not forgive other people, which in line with it's okay for you to always remember their fault. It's okay for you to do the revenge toward the other people that harm you in the very first place, right? We think that this is not healthy mind at all, right? Because at the end of the day, we think that these children will asking, why I have to forgive other people if I can choose to not forgive them, for example, right? And they will think that why it is justified for me to forgive other people. They will bring this problem until they'll be adult, for example, right? And they can tell to other people what the harm that they get from these people at the very first place. Like, even if the harm is not that big. For example, like their friends in school just like steal their paper. But because there's no incentive for them to forgive these people, they can bring this problem until they'll be adult. They can talk to other people like, these people steal my paper, etc. Other people will judge these people as the pencuri, for instance, right? What will happen after that? These people that being judged by other people, they can also be oppressed, right? Because at the very first place, they do not do or like give a big harm, for example, right? So we think that this is bad. In comparison to our side of the house, right? The healthy mind exists because since these people were children, for example, they have the mindset that, forgiveness is the virtue. Well, the value will support each other, like I've said before. Like, it will make them think that, it's okay for me to forgive after do the self-esteem, etc. Because it can create peace for my life, for example, etc. There's no dendam for other people, for example, right? They can still have good relationship at the end of the day because we, at the very first place, we forgive them. We can also create a good relationship with these people at the end of the day, where we can support each other, for example. We can develop each other. We can accept it. We can show that this concept is really good at the end of the day because this concept is good at the end of the day, and we can like develop together because we think that this concept is important. Forgiveness is the virtue. That's all from me. Well, proud to oppose.
Thank you, Opposition Whip, and also congratulations everyone for finally finishing the last preliminary round of NUDC 2024. Hopefully you still had fun in this round. I think that everybody can immediately go back to hall, or at least make sure that you will be at the hall during